Hi, welcome back to my channel and the start of a brand new series. I realised the other day we're coming to the end of 2022. 22 years of the 21st century have passed. That's incredible. And, that's a fifth of the century. It's amazing. Now, as someone who's just turned 50, I'm of a generation that still thinks of cinema as a 20th century art form. So I thought it might be quite interesting to take stock and to look at what my favourite films have been of the last 22 years. What do I think have been the best films since the turn of the century? And so I thought I'd pick 22 films, one for each year. I'm not picking one from each year, 2001, 2002, but 22 films to represent that whole era, that represent what I think are the very best of cinema in the start of this new century. And I've picked one film per director. So today we're going to look at 7 of these films. And the first is Mulholland Drive, which I spoke about in a previous video. I still think this is one of the best films of the century. It's a remarkable movie. It continues a strain in David Lynch's work, which arguably started with Twin Peaks' Fire Walk with Me, a very underrated film. Which a new kind of horror film, where the horror is more to do with identity than it is to do with spirits or ghosts or gore. And it sort of begins with Twin Peaks' Fire Walk with Me, how David Lynch reinvestigates the whole Twin Peaks mythology in that film. And then it really sort of took root in Lost Highway, an extraordinary film, where this guy, one minute he's a sort of jazz musician, the next minute he's a young guy involved with this sort of mob boss. And then it reached its, apogee, its masterpiece in this movie, where the Naomi Watts character, she apparently is an actress working in Hollywood. She's been picked by this director, but we see through a slip of identity and the change in the film form and its narrative that that's not what she is at all, that she's a prostitute, a failed actress, and she's been left by her partner, who also has a sort of strange fractured identity across the film. It's an extraordinary movie. There are all sorts of doubling and tripling, different avatars of Naomi Watts' character appear, and there are all sorts of stories doubling and tripling in on each other. So one minute there's a guy in a fast food restaurant, and there's some weird creature behind a wall. The next minute there's a director trying to get a particular actress for his film, and he has to go and visit this cowboy out on this strange ranch at midnight. But all these stories are sort of interweaving in and out of each other. I remember when I saw the film, I think it came out in 2001, and I remember, it starts with that kind of jitterbug sequence with all these people dancing, fractured in this kind of purple haze. And I remember thinking, I don't want this film ever to end. And that was in the first 2 minutes. That's how much I liked it. And I loved the film right up until Silencio. And a lot of people came out of the film saying, I didn't understand what the hell it was about. I never felt that way about this. Perhaps a little bit about Inland Empire, but never about this film. It made perfect sense to me, but then I wasn't trying to make narrative sense of it so much as poetic sense. Lynch's films, they're not meant to be sort of sat there and taken literally. You're supposed to think about them in a sort of poetic, lyrical sense, where the elements come together in a rhythm and a sort of rhyme that impacts on each other and gives you the sense of what he's trying to say, the sense of the character. And I think in that sense this is his most beautiful achievement. And I think it's still one of the really great films. And it's also, I'd just like to quickly just say this, it's also a great work of the erotic. In Britain and America, we're rather, awkward and timid about talking about the erotic. But Lynch is not just a great surrealist, he's a great erotic director. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I think it's one of the great joys of this movie. But, yes, well, I'll leave it there. My next choice, I'm presenting these films chronologically, I should say, not in any order. This is the Before trilogy, the Criterion's release of the Before trilogy, Richard Linklater's ongoing work with Julie Delpy and Ethan Hawke. I love these films. I really adore them. The film I'm choosing is Before Sunset, the second film, but I could just as easily have chosen the third film, Before Midnight. I actually saw Before Sunset first of all of these movies. And then I went back and watched Before Sunrise, which had been done about 10 years earlier. If you're not familiar with these films, Basically, what it is, it's about a young teenage, sort of young student boy and a young student girl. They meet cute on a train in Austria, a young American and a young French woman. This is in Before Sunrise, the first film. They spend a day and a night together, they kind of fall in love, and they agree to meet the next year at this certain place. They don't do it. 10 years later, comes along Before Sunset. They've now matured into adults. The boy has become a writer and has a successful career. He's visiting Paris as a visiting novelist, and she's also got a life of her own. And they meet again, and they sort of swap notes about what's happened in their lives. And the movies take the form of one long conversation that goes on for about 80 minutes as they wander the streets of Paris. And it's a back and forth. Some people might not think that's very cinematic. I think it's the heart of cinema. Watching people, their gestures, how they talk to each other, how they react to each other. I think it's what cinema is all about. I don't care that it's just a series of long travelling shots. I don't care that it's lazy and laid back. To me, it's the heart of cinema. And brilliantly, we find out that actually one of them did turn up to the meeting all those years ago and was disappointed. And what at first seems a leisurely conversation breaks down, and the adulthood and the disappointment and jadedness of what they've come through in their lives comes out. Brilliant sequence in the back of a taxi. But eventually they come together, and at the end it's left wonderfully ambiguous as to whether they'll stay together. Wonderful scene with Julie Delpy sort of dancing around her living room. I love that film passionately. The interaction of Delpy, Hawke and Linklater is superb. The writing and the acting is absolutely A1. As I said, I like the third film, Before Midnight. It's a superb movie, but I'd pick Before Sunset as my absolute favourite of the three. Next up, anime. Hayao Miyazaki from Studio Ghibli. Now, for the longest time, I wasn't very keen on feature-length animation, right? I never cared for Disney. I was that kid at school who didn't like Disney films. What a miserable bastard, I know. But I didn't. I thought they were boring and I hated them. And so I avoided, when people got into Toy Story and Pixar, I didn't watch these films because I couldn't stand them, right? But I got this book. It was called Film: The Critic's Choice. And it asked 10 major critics around the world to pick their 15 choices from periods of cinema history. So it started with the silent era, then it went to Hollywood, the golden age, then it went to the Nouvelle Vague years, etc. And the last one, unusually in a film book, they gave it to an animation critic, and they asked him to pick the 15 best animations in film history. And one of them that he picked was Laputa the Flying Island, otherwise known as Castle in the Sky, the third Miyazaki animation. And he made this extraordinary claim that this was a classic up there with the best works of Mizoguchi and Ozu in Japanese cinema. Wow. I couldn't believe it, so I thought, that is a hell of a claim, mate. You're exaggerating a bit. So I thought, well, I've got to test this. So I got out the film Princess Mononoke, which was Miyazaki's 1996 film. And, well, I was wrong. It's a masterpiece. Absolutely brilliant piece of filmmaking, superb narrative, great complexity of storytelling, detailed characters and beautiful animation. And since then I've been a complete Miyazaki nut. I love all of his Studio Ghibli films. This is my favourite of the 21st century. I know many people pick Spirited Away, which I also love very much. I just happen to like this film. It's based on a story by a Welsh writer called Diana Wynne Jones about this young girl who finds herself in this moving castle, a wonderful contraption, this kind of, mechanical castle that moves along on two great big clawed feet. And she's transformed by this witch into an old woman and spends most of the movie as an old woman, which I think is kind of sweet, really. And she's trying to turn herself back. And I like the various plays on the idea of transformation throughout the movie. And there's some beautiful, almost metaphorical sequences. Like there's a dream sequence where she's with the witch and suddenly she's pushed away from her and there's a whole ocean appears between them. It's a beautiful scene. And I think this is a high point in Miyazaki's animation and in his storytelling. Next, I felt I had to pick a film by the Darden Brothers, Jean-Pierre and Luc Dardenne, who were such important filmmakers to me in the early 2000s. their star has fallen a little bit, let's be honest. But in the early 2000s, they seemed two of the most important filmmakers around, making really good social realist films in their hometown of Serran in Belgium. This is my favourite of their films from this period, L'Enfant, starring a brilliant performance from Jeremy Renier as a young guy who gets his girlfriend accidentally pregnant and then sells the baby to these kind of, I don't know what you might call them, baby smugglers or whatever. Um, it's a brilliant portrait of how poverty changes people and guides people and makes them grasping and sometimes selfish in their desperation. One of the things I like about the Darden Brothers is they show the truth of poverty. Often in British social realist films, they do this kind of the noble poor. There's nothing noble about being poor, it's shit. And that's what I think the Darden Brothers, where they're superior in a way. They show the shittiness of poverty. And you still come to like the characters anyway, and you come to sympathise with them anyway. And the filmmaking is clear and vibrant and intelligent. They even have a car chase in it, which is actually genuinely exciting. Well, it's a sort of moped chase. So this is a very good film, and I highly recommended. The key director, I think, of the early 2000s was Jia Shankar, who's a Chinese director, and probably still the best sort of reporter or documentarist of what happened in China from the mid-90s onwards, the capitalist reforms and how it shook up the country. And in the 2000s, he produced a series of 4 real masterpieces: Platform, The World, this film, which I've chosen as my favourite, and 24 City. This is a film about a project undertaken by the Chinese government, the Three Gorges project, where they dammed up this whole valley in this province. I think it's Guangdong province, I think. I don't know about that. And it basically flooded the whole area, including this entire city. And all these people were moved. And Shankar made this kind of quasi-documentary, quasi-fiction film about it. Filming in the area before it was flooded, watching 2 people looking for their missing spouses in the area. The documentary footage is breathtaking in its beauty and also heartbreaking, really, in what it's showing. But Shankar is a very interesting filmmaker. He experiments. I mean, there are 2 UFOs in this film, and a building takes off in the background behind a character. An incredibly playful and yet also very, very serious filmmaker. I think this film is a masterpiece. I remember he did an accompanying documentary to this film called Dong, about an artist who was also covering the Three Dams project. And I remember seeing this, I can't remember where I saw it, it might have been the ICA. The first shot came up of the mist above the valley. And I was just like, my jaw dropped, and I thought, this is what cinema is for. So if you can catch it, this film and its accompanying documentary, it's beautiful. Another key director, I think, of the 21st century is Apichatpong Weerasethakul, or as he likes to be called in the West, Joe. He is a Thai director. Now, I first came across this director. There was a film at the London Film Festival called Tropical Malady, right? And the film, for those people who haven't seen it, is divided into 2 parts. The first part is about a young Thai soldier meeting this guy in a gay bar in Thailand, and them sort of getting together and talking. And then it cuts, and you're with this soldier in the jungle, and he's hunting down this tiger, this kind of mythical tiger. I went to see this film. I came out of the cinema, I thought, what the hell have I just watched? What the hell was that about? And I was kind of confused and a bit annoyed. And on the way home, I was just thinking about it. And that week, I saw a thing in Sight and Sound magazine that they were offering places on a film journalism course. And to be considered for this course, you had to write a Sight and Sound style review of a film. And when I got home, I realised I had to write about Tropical Malady. I had to get it out of my system. And in writing about it, I realised how much I loved the film. And I became a great devotee of this director. Most people know him for the his Cannes film, Uncle Bunmy Who Can Recall His Past Lives, which is terrific fun. It's got werewolves with red eyes, ghosts, and a woman being shagged by a fish, which is great fun. But actually, my favourite of his films is this film. I don't know why, I just find this film so beautiful. It kind of gets under my skin. It's a sort of semi-autobiographical portrait of his parents, who were both doctors out in the countryside in Thailand, and how they meet, and the various strange patients in their clinic. You know, a woman who has a bottle of alcohol in her prosthetic limbs, and a Buddhist monk who wants to become a DJ. It's a very strange film. It casts a sort of spell over you, a kind of mystical spell. And I love it to pieces. I don't know how else to say about it. It's a film you've got to experience for yourself. Watch out for the air conditioning pipe. And finally, after all those respectable, excellent choices, I'm going to pick Valhalla Rising. So there's a lot of people I've worked with in the past, particularly in the realm of audio description, which is describing films for the blind, who would happily murder me for picking this film. I remember when they actually were doing this in the office, and I let slip that I loved this film, and I think they were going to throttle me, because there's barely any dialogue in it, and it's incredibly slow and weird. Anyway, so it's the London Film Festival. When did this come out? I think it was about 2009. London Film Festival. And in the brochure of the London Film Festival it says, come along and see this amazing, exciting Viking action saga. A bit like The Northman, right? Lots of half-naked men going, "Roar," like that. So, it's made in Britain. I thought, I'll go and try it, something different. So we go into the cinema. It's a packed cinema, right? And Nicholas Winding Refn, who is the punk director of our times, isn't he? He's a little punk in both senses of the word, the old-fashioned, punk music sense and the Clint Eastwood sense of a punk, right? He comes out and he goes, this is what happens when you go up north and get drunk on whiskey and make a film about Vikings. So anyway, that's what he said, right? It's a bit of a git, And anyway, this film starts, and of course it is not an action-packed Viking saga. It is the slowest, glacially paced film of all time. Barely anything happens. Mads Mikkelsen is a sort of northern barbarian. He's been captured by some Scots, and he's forced to fight in this kind of grim open-air arena. And there's lots of skull bashing and bone breaking. And then he gets free, and he gets onto a boat with some Christians going to the Promised Land. And the boat sequence goes on forever. Oh my God, they're on this boat for so long, and they've got no water to drink, and they're all, and then finally they come to the Promised Land, which we're supposed to believe is America, though it looks like Scotland, but it's very beautifully done. And they get attacked by some Native Americans, and basically that's it. And there's one scene where they eat magic mushrooms, and they have a massive mental hallucination, and all sorts of weird shit is going on. It looks like one of them is raping the other, then they're killing each other. The screen is washed in red. What the fuck is happening, right? Why do I pick this film? I should tell you a little story, actually. A friend of mine came to stay, and he was ill. And he said, can we watch a movie, Mike? And he pulled this down. Because look at this cover. It looks really exciting, right? And he's never forgiven me ever since. It made him even more ill watching it. Anyway, why do I pick this film? Okay, the reason I pick it is because what makes a great film for me? I'm not interested in the Oscar way of looking at film. It's got good cinematography, good acting, good sets, bollocks. I'm not interested in that, right? I'm not interested in anything but, I'm not interested in political or sociological readings. Some of those can be interesting, but it's not my thing, right? What I'm interested in is the experience. And what I mean by that is the total experience. What this film, watching it and wrestling with it and interacting with it, gives me. That's what I'm interested in. And that's what's most vital to me. The experience of watching Valhalla Rising was totally unexpected. I had no idea that it was going to be like this. I'd never seen anything like it. And that in itself was exciting. It gave me something new. It gave me something to wrestle with. Did I like this? Did I not like this? What was I going to do with this film? How was I going to respond to it? That was exciting to me. So few films give you that. The other year, last year, I watched Cannibal Holocaust for the first time. Now, you say that's a great film, people will look at you a bit weird. But for me, it was a great experience. Because watching Cannibal Holocaust and finding out that it was a better film in terms of its making than I thought it was going to be, and it challenged me in interesting ways and had a beautiful music score, and making me think about the horror genre, that's all part of that film for me, right? So even though the ancillary things are all part of the experience, one of the things I like about this film is it genuinely puts you in the mindset, the frame of mind, the kind of plane of thinking of a sort of barbarian telling a saga, an epic round the fire. The exaggeration of it, the slowness of it. I like that. It's not a boring modern film that's telling a narrative in a modern way about old times. It gets you into the spirit, the mind, the sort of fever dream of that time. So even though you could argue that in some ways it's an indulgent movie, some parts of it are crap, some parts of it are boring, the overall experience fascinates me. It gave me an experience that very few other films this century have given me, and that's why it's on this list. So that's it for today. I feel I haven't said enough about Mulholland Drive, but really that is a film that I think could have an entire video to itself. There's so much to talk about there. It really is a masterpiece. But that's the first part. The second part is coming shortly. Thanks very much.